Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, August 31st, 2017. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Owen Lingley, Jess, Caudill, and Jason Stepper from Imperial Organic Yeast join us to talk about their fairly new company and answer your questions from social media. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And if you buy any of our DVD combos, you get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener. And don't forget to get a copy of our Brewer's Logbook. You can use it to log and track up to 50 batches of beer. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again, everybody, clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Very important. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, think of us first. Go to basicbrewing.com. Click on that ad on the right-hand side of the page. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show. We greatly appreciate your support there. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app at Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory. We're on the Stitcher app as well. We're on Google Play Music, and we're on the iHeartRadio app too. And if you do us the favor of rating us on iTunes and maybe leaving a nice comment, that'll help new listeners to find us. And if you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our virtual guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support, and thanks to everybody who's done so already. I've posted a new episode of Basic Brewing Video this week on Monday. It's finally the show about my SCOBY Soured Rye Session Ale. I was waiting to post it until I did some investigation into the mysterious bottle bomb issue. I've talked about that beer a bunch on this show, so I don't want to recover that ground here, but it was a very fun experiment. So take a look at that video on our video podcast feed or on our Basic Brewing YouTube channel to see more details. I can't stop watching the news and reading online about all the terrible events down in Texas surrounding Hurricane, now Tropical Storm Harvey. When I was a reporter, I covered several floods down around South Arkansas, and I know it doesn't take a lot of water to just ruin your house, to wreck your house. Just a few inches in the house, and floors buckle, carpets are saturated, walls are saturated, cabinets warp. You know, the furniture is just wrecked, and not even to start on the mold issues. So we're thinking of you down there. I know there are a bunch of people that are hurting and that are flooded, and there are a lot of home brewers in the Houston area, too. That's the home of the Dixie Cup, which is a huge competition. I think it's the second biggest competition in the country, maybe. So I'm hoping that you guys are all safe down there and we'll be on the road to recovery soon. On to more happy things, or at least more hoppy things. Let's hear from our sponsors, Desiree and Dave of High Gravity in Tulsa. Right now, High Gravity's having a sale on select 1-pound bags of hops. Until September 15th, you can get 20% off 1-pound bags of Amarillo, Cascade, Centennial, Chinook, Citra, Columbus, Falconer's Flight 7 Seas, Falconer's Flight, UK Fuggle, Hallertau Traditional, German Tettnang, and Willamette. Willamette. You don't need to enter a code. Just go to highgravitybrew.com and just select the 1-pound size to get 20% off until September 15th. And while you're on highgravitybrew.com, be sure to check out their awesome turnkey electric brewing systems and Wordhog electric brewery controllers. Tons of options from 5 gallons all the way up to 2 barrels. Check out all of that at family-owned and operated highgravitybrew.com. The Brewlosophy guys posted a homebrewers survey a little while back, and I was amazed at how many people still brew with propane. We got to make a change there, folks. Take the pain out of propane, and check out electric brewing. I got an email a few weeks back from Casey at Imperial Organic Yeast. inquiring about advertising opportunities with this very podcast. Now, I don't advertise products that I don't use or companies or organizations that I'm not familiar with and comfortable with. So I thought I'd have Owen, Jess, and Jason on the show to get to know them and to give you an opportunity to ask them some questions. Well, I want to welcome Imperial Organic Yeast to the podcast. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio, guys. We have Owen Lingley.
Hey there.
Jess Caudill.
How's it going?
And Jason Stepper.
Hey there.
Now, you guys, the first time that I was aware of you guys was at the National Homebrewers Conference, and then, I see these little cans of yeast. So, something a little different, something, that had a little buzz going around the conference. Give us some background. Who wants to start? Who wants to give kind of the origin story of Imperial Yeast and where you guys started and where you are and what your setup is like and all that?
Sure. This is Owen, and I can knock that out pretty quick. I've been working on the company for about 4 years. We did our first full cook about 2.5 years ago, something like that. We're based in Portland, Oregon, kind of on the outskirts of Portland towards Gresham. We all used to work for Yeast, and, it just kind of got to the point where we would sit around and have beers with each other and say, it'd be awesome if we could do this. And that wasn't going to happen there. So I decided to go off and start our own. And then I was lucky enough to get Jason and Jess to come on over and help out. Basically started up because we thought we could do better. Biz is pretty good. We're expanding fairly rapidly here. We just got pallet racking in last week, which is kind of a big deal. Audio tour of the lab. It's kind of a cross between a brewery, a warehouse, and a kind of a lab setting. So we have some -80 fridges on site and off site, which store our mother cultures. We culture starters up from those, grow them up, and then once they're at what we term a brewery volume, it's going to get moved out to the brewery side of things. Lots of conical fermentation tanks. We cook in a pressure kettle. Boiling isn't sterile enough for us, so we have to get to 240 and 20 psi. We brew high gravity, blend down with sterile water, and then batch feed the yeast in. The tanks look just like conical tanks in a brewery. They're a little different, but you probably wouldn't notice just walking through. We grow the yeast up, feed it sugar. It divides, keep it clean. Turn on glycol, crash it, harvest, concentrate or dilute to the same level across the board per strain, and then goes off for either homebrew or commercial packaging.
And why organic? And what's it take to be an organic yeast company?
This is Jason here. I think why organic? It was kind of the last piece of the brewing puzzle. There's been organic malt, there's been organic hops, so in order to make organic beer, we needed organic yeast, and it wasn't out there, so we set off to see if we could figure out how to do it, and through a year of bench trials and going through that process to make sure that we can source the ingredients to make it organic and still get the growth rates that we need to be commercially viable. We came to a solution. We just felt like it was if we could, then we should, and so that's kind of the why, and I think there was maybe a how in there. How can it be organic?
Yeah. I mean, if you see the organic seal, the USDA certified organic seal on there, that's not just a marketing label. There's a lot going into being certified, right?
Absolutely. And so the difference there, the key differences are the raw ingredients going into the media. So our sugar sources, those are all certified organic. And then our mineral additions are naturally mined instead of synthetically produced, which is kind of the cheaper, easier, more available alternative. Some of those are petrochemical byproducts. Others are just, the synthetically produced minerals are cheap and easy. So getting through those hurdles and establishing a media recipe that gave us sustainable growth those were the steps basically that we had to take to do that. It's not a marketing gimmick at all, and I think a lot of people there's a perception that organic is maybe more expensive. For us, it's a quality issue, and per cell, we're probably the cheapest yeast out there.
Yeah, you say per cell. Andy Brown on Twitter asks, with so much choice available for homebrewers these days, what sets your yeast apart from the competition? And one qualifying factor, I guess, would be cell count, right?
Yeah, this is Jess. Cell count was definitely one of the number one things on the list for offering a quality yeast to homebrewers. So we're trying to pack in as much yeast as we can into the container so homebrewers can direct pitch the yeast instead of having to rely on making a starter as you do with other manufacturers' yeast for homebrewing a 5-gallon batch.
Now, it says on your package that you have 200 billion cells, right? And the competition is about half of that?
Yeah, this is Owen. So if we do our job right, we have 202 billion cells in each can. Our lab concentration is 1.29 billion cells per mil, and there's 155 mils per can. Those are just kind of big numbers. What that equals out at is a pitch rate of 10.5 million cells per mil when you put one can into 5 gallon. And so if you're running a 10 Plato beer, that's 1 million cells per mil per degree Plato. If you're running a 20 Plato beer, it's 500,000 cells per mil per degree Plato. What I found working at other labs was 95% of the QC issues that we ran into was pitch rate related. And, the established brewing science is about 0.75 million cells to 1 million cells per mil per degree Plato for ale fermentations. And no other lab is anywhere close to that. Y yeast packages at 100 billion cells per mil. So one activator into 5 gallons is going to give you a pitch rate of about 5 million cells per mil. And then White Labs they don't concentrate or dilute their strains, so their cell count varies, but it's around 60 billion cells per package. So their pitch rate is substantially less than established brewing science, and that's why you see extended lag times or it's a higher chance for off flavor. Can you make good beer, and do people make good beer with Y Yeast and White Labs? Absolutely. We have friends up at Y Yeast still. Chris White has always been a great guy to hang out with. We just saw an opening in the market that nobody was providing direct pitch in a direct pitch for homebrewers or commercial brewers. And everybody's kind of hiding or doing a little bit of smoke and mirrors, because once you boil down the math to what people can understand easily, people aren't dumb. They can see the results in their beer, and they can do math fairly easily once you boil it down to some basic numbers. And we just wanted to fix that.
Now, I attended a session at one of the homebrew conferences that was hosted by one of your competitors, and they were talking about pitchable yeast rates, and the questions were, the hands were going up in the audience, and people were saying, well, why do I still have to make a starter? And they were saying, well, you don't have to make a starter. And they said, well, we feel like we do have to make a starter just based on the performance of the yeast. And so, there may be some at least anecdotal evidence out there to back up your assertion, as it were. Now, I can contribute some of my own evidence into this. You guys comped me a can of the A04 Barbarian yeast that I pitched into a 1055 gravity Cascade Pale Ale the other day, and I have to say that I didn't use a starter, and I didn't use oxygen. I just I know that's a sin, but I just shook the carboy. And by the next morning, that sucker was was going faster than most fermentations that I've ever seen. I mean, I took video of the airlock because it was going so quickly. I was amazed, but I'm a skeptic, and so part of me is saying, well, that's great, but I've been told over the years that you don't want to overpitch yeast. So how do you convince me that I'm not doing too much of a good thing?
As Owen was talking about earlier with pitch rates, there's I guess certain accepted quantities of yeast you want to use, and those are anywhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 cells per mil per degree Plato to as high as 2 million cells per mil per degree Plato. Most ale yeast, or most people brewing ales, are hitting that 0.75 to 1 million cell per mil per degree Plato. If you go lower than that or higher than that, the flavor profile may change a little bit or a lot, depending on the strain. So I think the risk of underpitching is way more of a problem than overpitching. If you overpitch some strains, you might get some undesirable flavors, but you have to do some pretty extreme overpitching to have issues. Whereas underpitching, it doesn't take a lot to have some pretty big problems if you're underpitched.
John Mollers on Twitter asks, why a can when other liquid yeasts seem to use vials or smack packs? Any advantages to the can? Why did you guys decide to go with a can rather than something more quote-unquote traditional for yeast?
Jason says because we're dumb. That's what we're laughing about. It's made our I run a mobile canning company as well, and so I know a little bit about canning. The inner liner of a can is very similar to the inner liner of a smack pack or a pure pitch. It's the same food grade nylon, basically. On it, there's not an advantage, and then having a rigid container makes your life difficult.
I think additionally, it's kind of a cool, unique package. It works really well in homebrew shops. A lot of the shops that we've all been to are displaying yeast in an old beverage cooler. So how better to display yeast than in a beverage container, in a beverage cooler? It billboards well, it recycles really easy, and it holds a nice volume so that we can actually give you, like we say, a direct pitchable amount. So those were the motivations for putting it into cans.
And the only negative comments that I have seen out there on the web have been one was from a couple of years ago. A home brewer on a thread said that he shook up the can really well to put the yeast in suspension, and then he opened it up and was surprised to see it spray out everywhere when he opened it up. And it took me back to my first couple times in pitching, White Labs in the old in the vials. I shook it up to make sure all the yeast was in suspension, and the same thing happened with those packages as well. So I guess there's a little bit of a learning curve that you've got to educate your consumers a bit. And when I got my yeast at Steve's Homebrew Store, I got a slip of a piece of paper with instructions on how to properly handle the package. So. And I didn't have any problem with it blowing up. So how should people handle these packages? How should people take care of your product so that it's as good as what you want it to be, when they pitch it in their beer?
So the most important thing with any liquid yeast is keeping it cold. So from the time we package it, that yeast has to stay cold to stay healthy. So store it cold at the shop. When we ship it out on ice overnight so it stays cold. Once that yeast is going from the homebrew shop to the customer's or the homebrewer's house, it needs to be cold. And then once it's time to use it, we recommend taking it directly out of the refrigerator right before you want to pitch it. And no shaking. Open up the can, pour part of it in, and then if there's yeast left in the bottom half of the can, use a sanitized spoon or other device to mix it up and pour it. But the challenge with liquid yeast, no matter what container it's in, is keeping it healthy and happy, and the only way to do that is to keep it cold.
Tim Durning on Facebook asks, we hear about shocking yeast by pitching it in temperature different from its own, but Imperial is meant to go right from the fridge to the wort. Could all yeast be pitched at a cold temperature into around 65 degrees of wort? And the shocking aspect of yeast, is it an older misconception?
I think there's information on thermal stress or shock when pitching yeast. A lot of that info probably came from some German brewing information, but most breweries around the country are typically pitching super cold yeast into warm wort with excellent results. I don't think it's an issue to pitch cold yeast into warm wort, especially when we're talking only a 20-degree difference or even less than that. The yeast isn't going to suffer from that temperature change. So I think it's better to take cold yeast, pitch it into wort versus warming up yeast, because if the yeast sits at a warm temperature for a prolonged period of time, it actually starts to degrade and the viability and vitality decreases.
John Letonin says, is the shelf life of Imperial yeast shorter, longer, or about the same as Y yeast and White Labs?
So we guarantee each can for 3 months. We're in the middle of some viability studies currently. Y yeast and White Labs, I think, are 5 to 6 months. I know Y yeast is 6 months, or they were. Fresh is better with yeast. And then making sure that it stays cold and it's handled correctly and you're buying from a nice local homebrew shop is huge for it. We do a couple things differently than anybody else. So after we harvest, we pour off our supernatant, so the beer that's produced in the fermentation process, and replace with sterile water early on in the process. So we're increasing pH and decreasing alcohol in finished product, which is helping out with viability over time. I still am hesitant to say that yeast is good 6 months from a date on a package.
Yeah, there's some variability in strains too. Some strains hold up a lot better on the shelf than others, so we tend to just err on the conservative side. But that's as Owen mentioned, kind of the middle of some studies on that, so that we can really tailor that essentially best by date to the strain itself. Because there are strains that are just fine in 6 months, and there's other strains that 3-4 months down the road have experienced some degradation.
Huh, interesting. And what types tend to suffer more?
Lager yeast doesn't like to hang out for very long. So lager yeast strains in general have a hard time with storing. Some of the better ones might be some of the English ale strains, and some of the Belgian strains have some strangely long shelf lives. So in general, those are some of the stuff. And then the German ale yeast, especially German wheat strains, don't like to spend a lot of time waiting to be pitched into wort.
Tim Strife says, any information about how they originally selected and cultured their strains for the first time from the source would be really fascinating, he says. So where's your yeast come from?
We basically snagged strains from other yeast companies that we knew worked well. So we had to come on the scene with yeast that people were already using and we had to be able to have comparable strains. So that's where a lot of our strains came from. We do introduce some other strains from different sources over time, depending on what is interesting and what we can track down.
And is there any one thing that you guys do is when I looked at the list of yeast strains that you guys market, it was a little confusing at first because you don't use similar names to other strains that so is there a chart somewhere where we can look at that's kind of a comparison chart?
I'll shoot that over to you today. We have this is Owen. We have our strain comparison chart, which is us versus Y yeast to White Labs to the brewery origin. We're 100% sure on us to Y yeast. We're probably 90% sure on us to White Labs, and about 95% sure on us or where it came from at one point in time. But yeah, we have that, and we'll get it on over.
And I guess you can't, and I could post a link to that in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. But I guess that you can't trademark or patent a yeast strain, right? It's kind of like a recipe.
You can't patent it if it's not a genetically modified organism. So if it's a naturally occurring organism, regardless if it's yeast or a tree or whatever it may be, if that's a naturally occurring organism, you can't patent that. I can't go out and dig up a cedar tree and then tell everybody it's mine and nobody else can grow.
Thomas Weaver asks, are they looking at any gluten-free options?
That's something we have kind of on the back burner, but the demand is not high enough to do it right now.
Jake Freshour says recommendations for pitching rates, OG limit per can perhaps on their lager strains, and why do they recommend only doing starters with a yeast of at least 2 liters on a stir plate? Is there a downfall to doing anything smaller?
Okay, so back to pitch rate levels. Was that the original question?
Yeah, I guess we should break this up into 2. Recommendation for pitching rates for the lager strains.
For the lager strains, if you're trying to hit the million cells per mil per degree Plato, then that would be about a 10 Plato or 1040 specific gravity for it. But there are people pitching a little bit lower, closer to the 0.75 million cell per mil per degree Plato, so that's putting you in the ballpark of, let's say, 14, 15 Plato.
And if you're pitching a lager, what temperature do you recommend the wort be at when you initially pitch?
I guess it depends on the brewer's comfort level with their fermentation control and techniques, but some brewers will direct pitch into their cold wort at fermentation temp. Some will pitch the yeast into slightly warmer wort, allow it to start moving a little bit quicker, and then drop the temp down to their fermentation temperature.
And then why do you recommend only doing starters with the yeast of at least 2 liters on a stir plate? Is there a downfall to doing anything smaller? In other words, I guess, are you really getting an advantage if you do a smaller volume starter?
Yeah, we recommend that 2 liter quantity so you can actually grow a significant amount of yeast. Taking a lot of yeast and putting it into a small amount of liquid doesn't achieve a lot of growth. So to get the significant increase in pitch, we recommend a 2 liter volume.
I guess would there be an advantage of kind of doing a viability starter on a smaller scale, or just to kind of wake the yeast up?
No. One of the basic things we tried to do was give people enough yeast for their batch without having to do that. So we typically recommend to direct pitch it.
Malcolm Fraser from the Brewlosophy crew says, pertaining to F08 per the webpage, Sour Patch Kids is a blend of low attenuating Belgian Saison yeast, Lactobacillus, and 2 Brettanomyces yeast strains. This blend is great for emulating alembics, Flanders Reds, etc. Seemingly, it does not contain pediococcus. If not, do they have any plans of incorporating it into this blend or perhaps other blends? He says, great product, fellas. Love, Malcolm.
Yeah. Right now we don't grow pedio just because doing so in a certified organic media is a little harder for that bug. And we've had awesome results and great feedback on that blend as is, so I don't think we're going to be tweaking it with pedio in the future.
Yeah, and this is Owen. Pedio takes forever to take off and produce any kind of flavor, and it's a pain to grow.
It's another bug that most people don't want around, so it's nice to not have that anywhere right now. But it, maybe will bring some out, but what people can achieve with lactobacillus is really nice, and it's not as invasive as a microorganism. The strain that we are growing is very hop sensitive, so brewers can feel comfortable introducing that bug into their brewery or homebrew setup without the fear of it cross-contaminating and creating some major problems. Whereas pedio, I wouldn't give that guarantee to anybody.
Jacob Wise says, have you studied the IBU limit of the lacto in the Sour Batch kids?
We haven't run specific lab trials on it, but we've had a lot of breweries use it in varying levels between 0 and 12 BUs and gotten feedback on how well it does. And the feedback from these different levels of BUs tells us it's extremely sensitive, and even going in the 5 ballpark is inhibiting that strain.
Wow.
Yeah, blend in with IPA if you want hop character later on.
Yeah, or if you're kettle souring, do the souring without any hops first, and then you can reboil and toss in hops later. But I definitely recommend not using hops with at least the lactose strain that we're producing.
Esteban Jorge asks, how can we get more funk out of the rustic strain without overstressing the yeast?
I'd say, you can alter a couple things with any of the Belgian strains where you're wanting to crank up the esters and the, standard Belgian character of that yeast. You can do a lower pitch rate, or you can cut back the oxygen a little bit, and then you can also crank up the fermentation temperature.
So you are basically stressing the yeast to get those flavors.
But not really past anything that it could handle.
Nathaniel Senf up in Vancouver says, why is Owen such a nice guy?
He's not.
Yeah, it's a thin facade. It's a thin facade, man.
Just need to get to know him better.
Well, apparently you were nice in Canada. So
yeah, they think everybody's nice, though. They're just being polite. Actually, the Van Brewers, that's a great group up there. They make some solid beer. The beer scene in Canada right now is it's blowing up. It's getting a lot smarter really, really fast. There's some really solid beer up there right now.
Yeah, if you look at the post that I did on our Basic Brewing radio and video page on Facebook, down in the comments, Nathaniel posted your hour-long presentation to the Van Brewers October meetup. And I guess you could search for that on YouTube as well. You get into more details on some of the things that than we are here today. Sam on Twitter says, any plans to export to the UK?
Yeah, we've actually shipped a couple commercial orders over there. About 20, maybe not 20%, but quite a bit of our business is overseas. If he's got a local homebrew shop over there, let us know and we'll shoot him out and earmark some samples for him. Yeah, we're shipping to like northern Finland right now for a brewery in the middle of nowhere. Like FedEx came in and laughed at us for Like even FedEx was like, yeah, we have no idea where that is. But, yeah, we ship quite a bit of yeast internationally already.
But at least it's cold up in Finland, right? For if it's going to sit on a truck for a long time while they're driving to the brewery. Are there any challenges with packaging in the cans? Have you guys had to kind of face any hurdles? Was there a learning curve in kind of getting used to this packaging?
I mean, we have a lot of challenges. We don't make life easy for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think we've relearned a lot of things we thought we already knew. I think anybody that has gone into a business could probably agree with that. That as much as you've learned over the years, you make some pretty dumb mistakes here and there. So hopefully we can minimize those.
And I mean, we're a startup, and we've shoestringed everything along for a long time, and we're forced into, when we were starting up, we had like pretty close to $0 in the bank. I'm not sure if it ever hit zero, but I know the amount that I did owe people was bigger than my bank account for a long time. And so, you're forced into doing things faster than you want, or and just like Jason said, relearning things that I think between us, when we started, we had 23 years of experience in liquid yeast, or 20 years, something like that, and still it's like it's a challenge. It's interesting every day.
So you think you've got a handle on the packaging and making sure that the product is stable?
Yeah, I think we're producing less. We have less off-gassing of CO2 and pressure buildup than anybody on the market right now. I mean, we are actively looking for other solutions, and then looking at internal process, how we can, the DME that we use, they only do the organic DME isn't handled the same way as the non-organic DME, and it, the terminal gravity can differentiate. There's differences there, so there's just a lot of things that a lot of hurdles we put in front of ourselves, but I think we're doing pretty good. And, I think the company's going to look a lot different in a year than in 2 years and 3 years and 4 years than we do today. But if I look back, 6 months ago, I'm like, wow, that was a mess. And now I'm like, we're pretty good. Then I'll look back 6 months ago from now and be like, wow, that was a mess. But like I said, we just got pallet racking. We're moving up in the world.
Now,
I'd say one of the cool things about being at this yeast company is really similar to home brewing and brewing in general, that there's always tweaks that can be made. Everybody's trying to do something different. Somebody's trying to improve their beer or their process. And so that's kind of the name of the game here too, is continuously improving how we do things. And we're never going to be perfect at it, but we're making strides to do that, to make things better and work better for everyone.
Now, when you open each of these cans, is the product going to look different from yeast strain to yeast strain? Should we expect some variation in what we're looking at?
Yep. We concentrate or dilute to the same level across the board for cell count. If you look at Pub, which is our most flocculent strain, that's 1968 or 007 for White Labs. It's a fuller strain. That stuff is cottage cheese, and you're going to get a giant gloop of it coming out. Yeah, is that a word? That's probably going to be 40% solid by volume in there, and it's a very flocculent, large cell size. And then if you move to Napoleon, kind of on the far side, it's tiny little cells, so it's going to look watery coming out of the can. And we get, I think yesterday I got a Facebook message on the page that the guy had been brewing with a bunch of pub, and then he switched over to Napoleon and was worried because, like, it looks like water. And I promise, man, it's the same cell count in there. We do the math. So there is variance based on cell size and flocculation on how hard it's going to pack up against the bottom of the can.
And you shouldn't be afraid to use a sanitized spoon to get in there and swirl that stuff up.
No, I mean, a spoon's easier to sanitize than a carboy. And when you start plating everything out, nothing is sterile. If you plate a big enough volume, you're always going to find something. But I really wouldn't. If you can't sanitize a spoon, I doubt you probably have some other issues in your brewing process.
Yeah, it's easy to let a spoon be completely immersed in a sanitizing solution for 15 minutes while you're brewing around, and so yeah, should be fairly easy to sanitize a spoon. Sam had one more question. He said, "What yeast would be best to use if I was aiming for an ordinary bitter like Harvey's Sussex Best?"
There's a few English strains that would work fine. I think our pub would be a great strain for that beer.
Frank Fletcher says visited their operations back in May, and they took the wife and I out to lunch. Really great people. So free lunch with every visit to the facilities?
There's actually like this awesome burrito spot close. So if it's not every time, but if I really want a burrito that day, there's a pretty good chance of it.
And you guys
here's a wall with a plasma center. That's how you know it's awesome burritos. We are a completely open lab.
Yeah.
So we have people daily stop in just randomly. And we'll take the time to walk through the entire process and walk you through the whole lab. We're really proud of what we do, and we want people to see what we do. We're the only lab that does that, you randomly stop in, we'll walk you through the entire process, spend as much time as we can with you. And we want people to drop on by.
Frank also asks, are you still considering opening an East Coast facility?
Yes.
And one in the north and one in the south. And so what are the plans for the future? I mean, have you got your sights on being, your logo is a crown. Are you guys, setting your sights to be the kings of the yeast business in the United States?
Not just the United States.
I think so. I think, we're definitely headed to the East Coast sooner than later. We're working on locations right now. But I think that we make the best product right now. I truly believe that. And I think if we can stick to that, keep the quality high and the support high, then, the product speaks for itself, and there's no reason why it wouldn't be.
Well, there you go. Well,
I personally want to ferment every home brew and craft brew in the country and the world until somebody figures out how to do it better and makes us compete. Craft beer is important. Home brew is important. Yeah, I want to do everything.
Well, there you go.
Every brewery that's using liquid yeast or dried yeast to switch over to us.
Might have noticed Owen's on the sales side.
Well, you gotta think big or go home, right?
Pretty much.
Well, guys, this has been fun. I'm looking forward to the next beer that I brew with the yeast, because one thing that has kept me away from liquid yeast is that I can, sometimes I can't schedule a brew. A brew's just got to happen when it happens. And if I've got to make a starter, that's planning ahead. So if I can have a product that I can just dump in the wort and have it go, that's what I'm after. So so far so good on this first one. So congratulations.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, James.
Well, Well, thanks again to Owen, Jess, and Jason. Nothing's been finalized, but you may be hearing me talk about Imperial on the show in the future. So far, I'm very impressed with the product. I've got a keg that Cascade Pale Ale that I brewed with their yeast, and see how that turned out. And I'm looking forward to more experimentation. You can find that chart that Owen talked about in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. And if you have the Basic Brewing app, I'll put that into the extras there too. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any DVD combo, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store as well. You can find our logbooks where you can track and log up to 50 batches of beer. Check all that out at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Guajillo Peppers, 1 pound. And Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Vinyl LP. Is it that time already? Wow. It gets sooner every year. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Don't forget you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate link on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.